This, ladies and gentlemen, is football.
Hello and welcome back to Total A-Leagues. I'm Vince Rugari, Tommy Oar. What is happening?
Great to be back.
Mate, how good? I mean, the semi-finals, it feels like we know what we're going to get. You can never rule anything out in this crazy competition, but it feels like we're just, we're trending towards an Auckland Melbourne City grand final across the ditch. I've been wrong before, many times before. I think that's what we'll end up with, Tommy. But some really strong performances from those two teams over the weekend.
There was, and I think, Western United in particular, they've obviously given themselves a mountain to climb. 3-0 down going into the second leg, and Melbourne victory is. I think you can never count out Melbourne victory though. I think that's the one that's still kind of in play, or more obviously. But Melbourne victory does relish that kind of, we saw against the Wanderers a few weeks ago, that away trip. So that's one to keep an eye on for sure.
It's not impossible. They'll have to do something they haven't done before, which is score against Auckland FC.
Yeah.
But our next guest, actually I'm really excited about this chat, Tommy, we're about to have, is one of those players who can do absolutely anything on a given day.
That's right.
It's a big welcome on Total A-Leagues to Daniel Arzani. Daniel, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Pleasure to be on.
What have you guys learned, I guess, in the dissection over the last couple of days from the first leg against Auckland FC?
I guess for us, it was a lot of what we knew was gonna be happening. Going into the game, we knew there was going to be an emphasis on set pieces and balls into the box. That's kind of what they're really good at. It was very similar to the last time we faced them at Amy Park, actually, where I felt like neither team could really get a good foothold in the game. The pitch was really slippery as well, which wasn't helping us. There was no real big clear-cut chances, but in the end, one moment makes a difference, and I think we knew that it was going to be that kind of game anyway.
Daniel, I want to ask you, it looked like on the weekend you had a bit of a free roll because, we saw you kind of on both sides of the pitch, and looks like you and Nishan Valuplay were kind of overloading the fullbacks or trying to get a numerical advantage on the sides. Is that something you kind of worked on, or was it just you kind of, using your freedom and going deep to get the ball and just moving around the pitch a bit?
I was just kind of drifting on the weekend. I think it was the only way I could really get on the ball in that game. They were pretty hell-bent on doubling up and man marking me. I kind of felt like Vries was just following me everywhere whenever I went into the pocket. So I felt like that was kind of the only way I could get on the ball. I was kind of drifting a little bit, maybe a little bit more than I should have.
So Daniel, obviously, as you alluded to before, what they did to you guys wasn't so much a surprise, but you had another look at it this weekend, the double teaming that you mentioned as well. What can you guys do, I guess, to approach the game differently so that their plans for you and Nish in particular aren't as effective?
Yeah, look, that's not for me to decide. I think we're definitely gonna be doing a lot of review this week and going into the game hopefully with a different plan and a different outlook on it. I do think that's one of the keys to unlocking the game. And I hope we can, as a collective, come up with a good solution. But yeah, I'm not doing the tactics.
Daniel, I want to ask you more, looking back at your season so far in a bigger picture. The first start of the season, I think you had some really good games. Obviously, was probably like the club, you kind of had inconsistency in and out of the starting lineup. But since March, you've kind of taken it to another level, and I think that you've been one of the standout players. What, in your eyes, has kind of coincided with you or us seeing the best version of you in recent months?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like you spoke about, I had a really, really strong start to the season, and then there was a little bit of a lull, and that was also coinciding with a new coach coming in, new system. It happens at every football club. We've seen it happen, hundreds of times in football. A new coach comes in. You kind of change the system. It takes a little bit of time to adapt. And for me, having that little fire lit under me by the boss, by Papa, was really helpful as well. It kind of reminded me of what I can do and what I should be doing week in, week out. And for me, that was like that little boost I needed to just push myself back into the team and to stay there and to be performing week in, week out.
Daniel, I wanted to ask just about, I guess, what it's like being a player in your position who, fair to say you're one of the more polarising players in the competition, and it feels like you're always, at least in terms of how people see you, at one of two extremes. It's either he's the best thing since sliced bread, or he's playing beneath himself and we need him to improve. I can't imagine that would be an easy position to be in, especially as a relatively young player still.
Yeah, look, for me, it's never been a problem. That's kind of the responsibility I take on with the way that I play. I take the ball forward a lot. I take a lot of risks in the way that I play, and I put a lot of responsibility on my own shoulders. I'm not afraid to make mistakes, and that's something I'll wear. When it goes good, like it was 2 weeks ago, the in the Wanderers game when I had not 2 assists, but helped create 2 of the goals, and everyone's saying it's really good. But on the flip side of that, if I had tried to take those 2 players on the edge of the box, lost the ball, then everyone would be saying Arzani's shithouse. So. That's just it's part and parcel of the game. And, you know what I mean? Everyone is quick to criticise, and that's just footy.
I had my fair share of criticism too, so I understand. But anyway, I want to ask you as well. It looks like you're off contract potentially going into this off-season. You've already had a crack at a few different clubs in Europe. Obviously had a few injuries when you were over there. So what is your kind of plan going into the off-season? What are your ambitions for the next few seasons?
Yeah, look, I'm not exactly sure. There's a really important game coming up this weekend, which I'm really focused on, and there's a really important window with the national team, which I'm really hoping that I can be involved with as well. Right now, those are my priorities, and yeah, for sure. Like the stint that I had overseas for me was super disappointing and felt like a massive, almost waste of time. And I think what didn't help me was that I was constantly doing these 5-6 month loan deals while being signed to City that it just doesn't work out. It's too difficult to go into teams and just start performing straight off the rip 5 months and get into a starting lineup. You're in and out, and you're not really that important to the club. So I'm hoping that if I was to make that move over there, it would be on a permanent transfer, and hopefully that way I'd be given more of a chance as well.
Daniel, just finally from us, back to victory on the injury front. We saw that Casey Boss was on crutches after the game on the weekend, and also the unfortunate news about Brendan Hamill. I guess you guys will be getting right around those two this week.
Yeah, look, we're super sad about BJ. He's such a great guy. He's been such a great leader in the change room this year as well. I actually shot him a message myself last night because obviously, it's been confirmed that it's an ACL, and I've been through that as well, and I know how challenging that can be. So just offering him my support. With regards to Casey, I don't think his one is too serious. I don't think it's anything that we have to be overly concerned about.
Fingers crossed that's the case, mate. Well, thanks again for joining us, mate, and good luck for the weekend.
All the best. Thank you.
Cheers, guys. See you.
He's a switch-on kid, man.
Yeah, he is smart.
And I like him. He's got his knockers, and I understand why those knockers exist. But I like him. I like his, I don't know if you call it arrogance, but I like his confidence. I like the way he talks about taking on responsibility. I wish we had sort of more players in Australian football who are willing to deal with the hard stuff and sort of the issues that come with it. If you're that sort of player.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, I just want to see him succeed, to be honest.
I think we all do, obviously. I mean, there's not been many young Australian players like him in the last kind of 10, 20 years, to be honest. I think he's so exciting every time he gets the ball. I do think if you look at kind of his trajectory and, why there's maybe been so many critics, I think that he's a little bit maybe a victim of his own early success because, when he broke onto the scene, he was obviously mesmerising to watch. He was so young, got into the Socceroos, went to the World Cup, and he kind of... everybody put his level so high, so early that any time he didn't play to that level, he was quickly criticised. And I think that can be a little bit harsh because, especially over the last few months, I think that for somebody, if there was someone who'd never seen Daniel Arzani play and you saw him play over the last few months, you would be thinking, who is this kid? He's unbelievable.
Yeah.
The way he takes players on is so positive. So I do empathise with him a little bit in terms of the criticism that he cops. But at the same time, I think that he's matured a lot in recent times. And I think that, this season, it was a really important season for him. Obviously at MacArthur, things didn't work out for him the way he would have wanted. And I think that this was a really decisive season. And so far, I think that particularly in the second half of the season, he's kind of reminded everyone of how good he is.
I want to live in the alternate universe where he didn't do his ACL on debut for Celtic. Because people forget he'd done all right to that point. He got into the first team. I think he looked okay as well before he did the injury. And then it all sort of unravelled for him from there.
Football can be cruel like that sometimes, I guess. And I think you just got to make the best of whatever cards you're dealt. And, I think that sometimes at different clubs, he touched on it in the interview, he went on loan and maybe the coach had a falling out with the coach or things didn't work out, and that can happen. I think that we've seen in other examples, for example, Aaron Moy, early in his career overseas, things didn't work out. At the Wanderers, he had his moments, but they didn't really work out. And it wasn't until he went to Melbourne City where we kind of saw the Aaron Moy, and the rest was history. And I still think with him, there's time for that to happen.
Yeah, hope so, mate. So the first leg, Auckland 1, Melbourne Victory 0. I don't know, it almost felt a little bit more comprehensive than that though, just because not a single shot on target.
That's right.
Victory had. And they've still not scored against Auckland FC, as I mentioned earlier. So it was just a classic shutout.
It was, and I think, you have to give Auckland so much credit because, defensively this season, obviously them and Melbourne City have been the two kind of standout teams, but the way that they defend and how hard they all work for each other, you rarely see the Auckland fullbacks kind of isolated in a one-on-one situation. I think Louis Verstrada and the amount of ground that he covers, any time that Sakai or De Vries would push on, he would always, cover a ridiculous amount of distance to cover them. And I don't know, he just seemed to nullify everything, and he's such a kind of physical power in that middle of the pitch that it makes it so difficult for teams to break them down. And I think Steve Corica has done such a ridiculously good job to make them so well oiled in terms of how they defend for each other and defend for their lives essentially for 90 minutes.
Yeah, De Vries has definitely been one of the signings of the season. I think he was in both of our teams of the season as well, a natural choice at left back. Here's what he had to say about his battle with Daniel Arzani on the weekend.
We spoke in the build-up to this game about that battle between yourself and Daniel Arzani, and it went from go to woe. How did you find it out there tonight?
Tough. He's obviously a quality player. We see what he does every week. Represents the Socceroos too, so we knew we had to be switched on. I want to thank the midfielders for helping me out a lot, coming back and doubling up. So, no, it was good. We know we're halfway there, so refocus for next week now.
Touching on exactly what you mentioned as well around the support from midfield, which is really important.
Yeah, it's huge. And I think that's the thing that kind of differentiates them. When we saw against the Wanderers, for example, the week before, every time Arzani or Valupale got past their fullback, they looked like they had space to attack. Whereas with Auckland, there's never that space just doesn't exist. And the ground that the midfield covers is phenomenal. And yeah, you do have to give Steve Corica a lot of credit for the way he sets them up.
That's why you never worked out as a left back, right? The midfield just never helped you out.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons.
As we've seen, De Vries had the assist for the goal for Auckland as well. This is the A-League download, boys, having a look at that.
Funny at that level, carry on.
Yeah, I was saying about Arzani. He said it was a nothing ball.
Yeah.
But it was actually a really good ball.
Yeah,
De Vries actually plays unbelievable balls into that box. His delivery is insane. Like he doesn't even have to look half the time. It's just muscle memory. But I mean, it was in a position where the keeper couldn't. I don't think really go. He can't go and get it. They lose the fly to the ball. Maybe Casey Boss, and then he's like, okay, are they going to get it? Rogerson slips in, and so for me, it wasn't a nothing ball.
It was a something ball.
It was a something ball. It was
I just wouldn't draw attention to the ball at all if I was the one that had let the guy put the ball in.
I was like, oh well, it's 1-0. We'll go back. That's how.
So they're talking about Daniel Arzani having called that a nothing ball, which I think is a bit... Man, if you're floating a ball like that into the 6-yard box, that's not nothing.
And, take this with a grain of salt because you just mentioned my left back kind of ability, but I remember playing left back when somebody put a cross in like that on top of you. It is so hard to defend that because on one hand you got the ball kind of coming across what feels like in slow motion, and then meanwhile you got over your other shoulder the winger coming across attacking it. It's got that run up on you and it's so difficult to defend. So De Vries did everything right. Putting that ball in that position, and you always a chance. And I think Melbourne Victory analysing it, obviously Casey Boss could have done a little bit better in kind of managing that situation, but I think Arzani was beaten too easily as well because you don't see the Auckland kind of wingers when they're tracking back allow other players to get crosses in the box that easily, and I think that'll lead the two kind of places where Victory will say they shouldn't have conceded was Arzani and also Boss.
A big part of Auckland's defence. We've talked a lot on this show about Australian centre-backs, young ones coming through, ones who might break into the Socceroos because they've had so many injuries in that position. But we haven't spoken much about Dan Hall, which is probably a bit weird by us. I mean, look, he missed a chunk of the season through injury. And maybe that's why he sort of wasn't involved in those discussions. But you think about where he's come from, which is a team on the Central Coast that won the treble, gone to Auckland FC and slotted in straight away. And when he's been there, they win games. In fact, he's only lost once as a player for Auckland FC, 9 out of 14 clean sheets when he plays. Tony Popovic should be looking at him very closely, right?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think he's a player that does slide under the radar, and I think the thing that the characteristics he has are he's not the player that's flying into tackles like you see other defenders in the league. I think he's positionally very aware, so that he doesn't get into a situation where he needs to make too many last-ditch tackles or diffuse a situation in kind of dramatic fashion, because he's always standing in the right place. And a player who did that as well was Alex Wilkinson. And I think that, you rarely saw Wilco kind of have to make slide tackles at the back, but he just seemed to nullify any threat because he read the game so well. I think Dan Hall's similar, and obviously he's got kind of tremendous athletic ability. He's really quick, and when you combine that with kind of his anticipation and these types of things, I think he's a very, very promising player. And whether he's ready for the Socceroos, I'm not sure. I think that he should be in the discussion, but I think the exciting thing for him is that I still think there's levels to him. I think that once he can kind of physically impose himself on attackers and be a bit more of an intimidating prospect to play against, I think that he's definitely a player that has a huge future and is extremely exciting, potentially for the national team.
A little side plot in this match, Tommy, was I don't know, are we calling it a controversy? Reed towel.
Yeah.
Funny one. So obviously Auckland FC had a towel placed on the sidelines to help dry the ball, to enable them to launch it from long throws, which are a big weapon in the game.
Yep.
And then we saw the amazing sight of a Victory staffer carrying it away, which somewhat reminiscent of same spirit as Andrew Redmayne throwing away the bottle that had all the Peruvian penalty takers on it, which is pretty funny.
Yeah.
But, mate, you played in the championship.
Yeah.
There's towels everywhere, right?
I think every team kind of did that. And I think, it's part and parcel of the game. It's something that I've always just, you don't even bat an eyelid when teams do it. Maybe Auckland should give every fan a towel going into the game this weekend, so to give to their players for throw-ins. So, for me, I think that it was fair game. It's also fair game for Victory to remove it, and if they want to do it, then they can just put lots of towels on the sideline.
Yep. More stuff for us to talk about on this show.
Yep.
We talked with Daniel Arzani as well about the injury situation for Victory. Hopefully, Casey Boss can make it because he's a really important player for them, and outside of De Vries, probably one of the better left backs in the competition.
Absolutely.
But Hamill, ACL, I think he's 32. It's a tough one.
It is tough,
he's been decent too.
He has, and I feel for him. I played with him in the Young Socceroos back in the day. He's had a great career so far, and when a player does an injury like this, particularly when they're in their 30s, it's always a question mark of how they're gonna kind of come back from that situation. But the one thing's for sure, and you can rest assured with Hamill, is that he's such a good professional that he'll do all the right things. And I'm sure in Melbourne Victory as well, he's got a club that, like Arzani kind of touched on in the interview, will look after him and do all the right things as well.
Looks like he knew straight away. It's a brutal game sometimes, isn't it?
It is.
So what do you think happens second leg, Tommy? Oh, not that I'm writing off Victory, but they're going somewhere which is really difficult to
fortress.
Win. They haven't scored against this team. They might be without two members of their best choice back four against a team that successfully nullified everything that they do good. So their hopes basically rest on what, again, Daniel was saying to us earlier is not his domain, but whatever Arthur Dillers is cooking up in terms of a new plan, they need a new plan to work for them to overturn this deficit and reach the grand final.
Well, the one thing I think you can almost guarantee is that you can't see Auckland conceding more than 1 or 2 goals at most. So if you think of it like that, if Auckland score 1 or 2, they've won. That's the kind of the way I'm thinking. So Victory have to be careful not to get too frustrated at not creating enough chances in the first leg and not send too many numbers forward and be too ambitious in their game plan, because on one hand, even though they need to score, they can quickly lose this tie if they concede early. So, I think it's a really interesting one. I think Auckland has all the cards, and I think they're definitely heavy favourites going into it. But you said it, you can never count out Melbourne Victory. We saw against the Wanderers. We both tipped the Wanderers to beat Melbourne Victory a few weeks ago, and Victory found a way to get the job done. And
they also did it last season at Wellington Phoenix. Different kettle of fish, different team. I think going to Go Media Stadium is a far more intimidating prospect than going to the Cake Tin.
Yeah.
But they can go over to New Zealand and produce something that doesn't look likely.
And it does, victories does the players, the big personalities, these big games and the hostile crowd probably against them does seem to have a bit of a galvanising effect on that team. So, you can't rule them out. I can't wait to watch the second tie. I think it's going to be tactically a very interesting kind of matchup too, because teams defending a lead, psychologically that can, the unintended consequence of going into a game with a lead can be, we need to defend that lead, and you kind of forget to do all the things that you did in the first game to win that game in the first place. So I think it's going to be an intriguing battle, but you have to say, if history is going to suggest anything, it's that Auckland will be too strong.
Everything you just said about that game applies threefold, mathematically, due to the scoreline, to the Western United Melbourne City tie, which is 3-0 to Melbourne City, a really comprehensive win there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard to imagine Western United flipping this one, to be honest.
They left themselves a mountain to climb, and I think, being honest, this game wasn't a 3-0 game. I think in the first half in particular, Western did create a number of chances, and I think the word for Melbourne City, and you could say that they've been this all season, is that they're very effective at both ends of the pitch. Defensively, they're so difficult to score against. They always seem to just do enough defensively to nullify any attack, and in this game they were so clinical in the front third. Like, great finish from Mathew Leckie, and if you go into this second leg at 2-0, it's a different discussion. I think 3-0, that is such a difficult scoreline for Western United to overturn, and I can't see anybody but Melbourne City going through in this tie.
We'll talk a little bit more about Mathew Leckie in a second, but I mean, Tilio was on song, and then two of their foreigners who we don't really talk about too much, Cohen and Goodwin. Did their jobs, man.
Exactly, and what a finish that was with the left foot as well, far top corner. I mean, we just said it, that was so clinical in this game. But yeah, all the front third players proved the difference, and I think that ultimately when games are won and lost in both boxes, and that sounds cliche, but it's true, and finding a way to take advantage of your opportunities and nullify the other teams for any good passages of play, it's all irrelevant. It's about capitalising and nullifying at the end of the day. And that's something that Melbourne City do extremely well, and their big players came up big in this game.
The ultimate flex available to a coach after masterminding a 3-0 first leg win is to say that they weren't happy with their performance, and that's exactly what Aurelio Vidmar did.
How impressive was that performance from you in terms of...
Impressive? I'm not sure about impressive.
You don't like it?
No, not really.
Tell us why. What didn't you like about it?
Very, very well, and had a really good plan, and we just weren't clean with our possessions, absolutely. And I think we scored at the right times. I think all 3 goals came when we probably were suffering a little bit. So as you saw with the stats, it was a pretty even game, but they probably could have scored 1 or 2. So
the way that you had those opportunities and finished them, though, I mean, that was the clinical part, because they had one chance and they put it where you needed it to be.
Yeah, well, that was a bit of our Achilles heel at the beginning of the season, most parts of the season, creating them and not really finishing them. Now we're having probably fewer, but we seem to be finishing them at the right time.
That's surely just trying to send a message to the squad, right? Just to say,
so.
no
don't
let-ups.
Be complacent. I think that's exactly what it is. I think it's got one eye. He doesn't want his team to think that the tie's over, because, we've seen 3-0 scorelines be overturned before in the A-League. I was on the receiving end of one of them. So, no, I think,
Really reliving some of your worst experiences on the show.
And we seem to do that quite often on this show. So.
Accidents.
No, I think that was very much that was the case, that Viddy's just kind of, making sure the players are remaining focused, and I think that they were the better team over the 90 minutes, even though his comments might lead you to believe otherwise. But they're so good, and they've got so many strong players that I can't see them not winning this tie.
He's done a good job, hasn't he, Vidmar? Not many people, I think, when he was appointed, were saying, "Oh, what a great move that could be." I personally thought it might be, because and I can rely on my previous life as an Adelaide United fan and the way he had the Reds set up way back in the day, masterminded that ACL run in 2008, which is still one of the, even though we lost 4-0. I can't remember. Whatever it was, the second leg, it was a bloodbath, but it was one of the happiest experiences I've ever had in football. And he's taken over a team that has been, Melbourne City in the last few years has definitely rebuilt. They've brought in a lot of young players and some foreigners that we didn't really know too much about before they came to the league. Finished second and stand on the brink of a grand final appearance. I
mean, I'm not surprised. And I worked with Viddy in the Socceroos and the national team for over a long period of time when he was an assistant there. And I think his football knowledge, and when he was a player, it's quite interesting. He played in so many different competitions. I think, you can almost name the league, and he pretty much played it in Europe. And I think that kind of gave him such a huge tactical understanding of different ways of playing football. And with this Melbourne City team, it's not the free-flowing attacking football that we've seen from Melbourne City necessarily in previous seasons, but it's not naive. That's the thing you can say. It's at both ends of the pitch. This team is so well organised. They all know their roles. They're fit. They've got a good balance of kind of youth and experience. And he's been dealt a pretty bad hand this season in terms of injuries as well, because, when you rewind into 4 or 5 games in the season when they got thrashed by Melbourne Victory in the derby, he had catastrophic injuries in the front third, and he found a way to just deal with that and make this season what is already a memorable season for them. So I think he's a fantastic coach and definitely flies under the radar in terms of the recognition, I think.
Good to see Mathew Leckie on the score sheet as well. We should be, I think, Tommy, enjoying every moment we've got left of him in this competition. Here's what he had to say after the game.
Yeah, I believe so. I think the strange thing with me lately is, I feel good in games, but it's the following day. So I'll see how I feel tomorrow. I guess we've got hopefully 2 games left if we get the result next week, and that's I guess there's nothing to lose. So I'm going to push my body, and hopefully I can stay healthy for the next at least for next week.
A lot of people who were watching that interview thought he was about to announce his retirement at any moment, and I really hope not, because talk about sort of OG Adelaide United times. I also have great memories of him just turning up out of nowhere. I think Adelaide signed him from what was then known as VPL2, Bulleen Lions. No one had ever heard of this kid before, and he comes on and basically dominated from game one.
He did.
We hadn't seen anything sort of like that. I think it was kind of like the first young player to really explode in the A-League back then. He's had an incredible career. I hope this isn't the end. If City win the grand final, I think he definitely bows out. But by the sounds of it, and you probably know yourself, Tommy, when you get in that level of pain after a game at that stage in your career, your body's probably telling you things.
And I think, when you look at this season for him, it's been so disrupted with injury that, it's a testament to his quality, and that even though it's been so disrupted, every single time he's played this season, he's pretty much been the best player on the pitch. And Melbourne City with him on the field are just another level again. So I think, fingers crossed for the league that he continues. Obviously, it'd be a sad day to see him retire, but whenever he does decide to retire, I think he can be extremely proud of his, what he's achieved, and obviously highlighted, so far in his career by that Socceroos goal in the World Cup. I mean, what a goal! One
of the best individual goals by a Socceroo, and what a stage to do it as well.
And I think for Melbourne City, they'll be hoping that he can repeat that in the next few weeks, I'm sure. So there's still a lot to play out, I think, with all that, and I can understand why he might feel that it might be time after this season to retire, given his injury situation. But at the same time, I think that his role to play in the next 2 weeks is going to be huge.
What about the Western United side of the equation, Tommy? They didn't have Noah Botic from the start. He had a quad injury, which, a player of his quality, the amount of goals he scored for them this season, really robbed something in terms of their attack.
Yeah. Well, I think if with the chances they created in the first half, you can't help but feel like if he was on the end of some of them, it might have been a slightly different game. And obviously he won the Golden Boot, so it's these kind of things are. When you don't have a player like him in your team, it's obviously going to have an effect, and fingers crossed he can play from a Western United perspective this weekend, because you want your best players on the pitch, and I think that if there's any chance of turning this tie around, they need him, I think.
Is he the sort of player who, if he's borderline in terms of fitness, knowing the situation that they're in, do they have to take a gamble?
Absolutely, and it's sometimes it's a little bit less of a gamble to start a player who's injured, because if you bring on a player off the bench who's under an injury cloud, you have to make 2 substitutions if something goes wrong. So starting a player under an injury cloud, I should say, is less risky in a lot of ways. And I remember when I played for Brisbane, John Aloisi did exactly this with Matt Mackay. He was under an injury cloud, and they decided to start him because if it went wrong, you just have to make 1 substitution, and I think that's what will happen this weekend.
Yeah. Fingers crossed, he's been absolutely integral to everything Western United have done this season, and man, I hope he gets back out there and performs well, because there's probably talk about Leckie retiring. Botic isn't retiring, but I'm sure he's not going to be in this league next season. The Sampoli rumours are getting stronger and stronger.
That's right, and I think from his perspective too is that it's interesting. I'm sure he's got his pure concentration on the game this weekend, but at the same time, he doesn't want to get a long-term injury as well. So there's a few things at play there potentially, and it's interesting to see what will happen. But ultimately, he's a fantastic player, and Western United need him to have any chance in this tie.
This is John Aloisi speaking post-match on the weekend.
Yeah, that was a disappointing thing. I thought we created some really clear openings in that first half, not only the chances, but even getting into that final third. And we spoke about before the game, those little details. We conceded off the corner, which was disappointing. Our set pieces probably weren't as good. We had plenty of them. We don't feel it was a 3-0 game, but we're down 3-0. So we have to accept that and move on and hopefully give them a hell of a game come next week, and that's all we can do, and then you just don't know from there. But there was a lot of good things from the game. It just looks really disappointing because it's 3-0. Yeah, they clearly finished their chances tonight better than us, but we can only prepare to try and win the game. We try and win the football game, and then all of a sudden you get a goal, and maybe they're nervous. We've got nothing to lose. No one's going to expect us to win, and they will have everything to lose. So we know that we're creating chances, even though we didn't score against them tonight. We created a number of chances. There will be, I'm sure Noel will be back. That's a big positive for us, and hopefully next time we can take our chances early on. We were 3-0 up against Wanderers in a major semi-final. And we ended up losing, so 5-4. So you never know. We got 90 minutes to do it.
Swear by accident. Yeah. I'm not getting people to talk about it. But no, so they just got to go for it, right? But they also got to be careful in going for it, because concede once,
it's all over. That's it. And I think you can fall into the trap of being too aggressive. We spoke about Victory doing exactly this too. If you're too ambitious in your game plan and in your approach, you can just it just takes one kind of sucker punch at the other end, and it's good night. So I think they will. The thing is with Western United, we've seen so many times this season, they're capable of scoring 3 goals in a game, even against Melbourne City. I think you can't. They're more than capable of getting 3 goals, but I think they're going to have a pretty balanced approach to the game. And if it's 1-0, if they can get a goal and kind of get 1-0, then there's something to build upon. But if you think we need to score 3 goals in the first 20 minutes and go out like that, I think it won't end well.
Yeah. Fingers crossed that we get a good contest and not an early goal to Melbourne City and a fizzer of a sort of 90 minutes. But all the best to Western United. Tommy, let's talk transfers. There's a lot of rumours going around the league at the moment. This segment is brought to you by eToro as well. Tommy, we'll start with the coaching side of things as well. So Ufuk Talay officially confirmed for one more season at Sydney FC. The club has an option for a further year beyond that, which means basically he needs to start well and do well next season, or it's curtains. A lot of fans who we've discussed wanted him gone already. The board's decided to give him a little bit more grace, acknowledge that some of their recruitment errors contributed as well to why they didn't make the finals. Do you think this is a good call?
Yeah, I think it was inevitable. I think that, reading between the lines, I feel like this was done maybe a month before the end of the season. And I was a little bit bemused at the time if that is how it unfolded, why they didn't announce it.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. They had verbally agreed to a 2-year extension, apparently, but it wasn't signed. So the club reviewed it. They'd already agreed to the terms. They didn't make the finals. I think that 2-year agreement as well was going to be on the basis of you do this, you do that, this is what you will get.
Got you.
And so they looked at it. They took all the things into account. They probably looked at the market as well to see who else was available. And one of the big fish that we've discussed on the show as well in terms of who Sydney FC fans wanted, Graham Arnold, is now in Iraq, so that one's off the table. And they probably just thought, we get the right signings in place and this can work, because I like what he tried to do.
He's still a great coach. I think that, I'm sure he would have learnt a lot about this season, and I think his mistake this season was that he was, he spoke about it a lot even on this show. He said that, this is the way the way I like to approach the game. There's certain principles he adheres to, but he didn't have the team to adhere to those principles. So you need to adapt. If you keep doing the same things and making the same mistakes week after week and not changing, then you're not learning from your mistakes. And I think that, being a little bit more flexible in his approach is something he would have learnt in recent times. It's probably the first kind of time in his coaching career where things haven't gone well. I think for Sydney FC, this is a huge off-season. I think their recruitment last year was wrong. They had too many attackers, not enough defenders, and that's something they're going to have to fix in this transfer window.
So a couple of those rumours.
Yeah.
Incoming Paul Okon Jr. apparently, either on loan or permanently from Benfica. We've seen bits and pieces of him with the under-20s, obviously. Yeah. He brings a heavy surname in terms of being Australian football royalty, the Okon family. So the idea, I guess, would be he wouldn't come to Sydney FC. He's at the point in his career where he needs to play. Yep. So he would play, I envisage, next to Leo Senna.
Yep.
From what you've seen of him, do you like that combination, and do you like this move for Sydney FC, especially if it's permanent?
The apple doesn't fall far from the tree in terms of his kind of playing style. His dad was such a terrific kind of technical midfield player, and that's exactly what he is. And I think we saw with the young Socceroos in their tournament how good he was, and he was pivotal to the way that they played. And I think it would be awesome to see him in the A-League. He's one of Australia's most exciting midfield talents, I think, and to have him at Sydney FC would be great for Sydney FC and great for the league. But, going a little bit deeper than that, I think it would be a little bit sad to see Caceres leave Sydney FC. I think that he's been pivotal to a lot of their success, so I would love to see them ideally play together.
Yeah. And then the other one, and the rumour that won't go away, is Joe Lolly apparently being looked at by Perth Glory very closely, and there's even been reports that Perth and Sydney have discussed a possible swap deal where Adam Taggart would go to Sydney FC and Lolly to Perth. I personally can't see that happening, mostly because Adam Taggart has been on the record talking about how if he finished his career and he didn't win any silverware with Perth Glory, obviously knowing that he's a WA boy, that he'd feel like he'd failed. So that's clearly something he wants to do. It's on his football bucket list to tick off before he retires. Having said that, though, he'd fit in very well into Sydney FC's team.
Well, I think if you're looking at a kind of Australian number 9s, he's one of the first names that comes to your mind, obviously involved in the Socceroos setup at the moment as well. This season was terrible from Perth's perspective, but last season he scored 20 goals, so he's a fantastic player. And the thing that would surprise me is it's not surprising that Sydney FC is interested potentially in Adam Taggart and that Perth's interested in Joe Lolly, because who isn't interested in them? But I can't see either.
Teams are interested in good players, I guess.
Exactly. So I think the interesting thing would be how big of a decision it would be from both teams if they let the other player go. I think there would be questions asked about that, I think.
We'll rip through some of the last rumours on our list, Tommy. One is Bruno Fornaroli, also being looked at by Perth Glory. Again, apparently he's got a house over there, but the Mariners and the Jets are apparently looking at him too. If you were Bruno, which one would you pick?
I would love, obviously I played for the Mariners myself, I'd love to see Bruno play at the Mariners, and I think, this year they missed a goal scorer, and to see him playing in front of the palm trees every week would be awesome.
Caceres is being looked at by Auckland and MacArthur. MacArthur gives him the benefit of not having to move cities. Yeah. Auckland gives him his old coach Steve Corica and an excellent team as well.
For me, Caceres is in the top couple of midfielders in the league, and he has been for a long time. So, I think, again, every team would be interested in him, and it's probably also about his ambitions in the Socceroos, and he wants to be in a team that will be successful, I'm sure. So that's an interesting one.
Sure. Craig Goodwin to Adelaide United, are you shocked?
I'm not shocked. I think, who knows? Obviously, he's had a few stints there, and he's just part and parcel of that club, but it'll be great to have him back in the league, so hopefully that happens.
Totally. Clayton Taylor, Newcastle to MacArthur, apparently.
Yeah. So is he still on contract?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think he's looking for a release. And look, on one hand, Newcastle looks like they're building something pretty interesting under Mark Milligan. On the other hand, MacArthur's been a good launching pad for young players as well, particularly wide young players. You can see him sort of becoming the Jed Drew, not only in terms of on-field role, but also what MacArthur will be trying to do with him as well. They'd want to bring in players like that, hopefully turn them into some money.
And also, I think sometimes for young players as well, a new environment can help take you to another level. We've seen it historically. For example, when I was a young player coming through, I played with Robbie Cruz at Brisbane, and we had glimpses, and he was doing really well. But then when he went to Melbourne Victory, he just took it to another level. And I think that that would be the idea behind that from his perspective, is trying to emulate something like that.
Totally. Juan Mata, we heard from him last week on this show talking about the possibility of investing into an A-League club. Apparently he has looked at the Central Coast Mariners. Right. So have Queen's Park Rangers. I've heard they've actually had people fly out to Gosford to check out the club, and they were impressed with what they saw. Either one of those would be a good outcome for the club, right?
Awesome. I think the fans just deserve, after so many years of uncertainty around the ownership, I think that some clarity and some certainty moving forward would be awesome for the fans and for the club. And it's such an awesome club. It's probably one of the only regional clubs in the league, and I think they're so important for the A-League, and I live on the Central Coast myself, so I love the Mariners and I love going down to watch them when I can, so I'd be all for either of those.
They've also been linked with Asier Ilaramendi.
Oh,
Tommy.
That's a throwback. That is. I mean, yeah. There's something about the Mariners and attracting these kind of Spanish players, and I think
Luis Garcia.
Exactly. So
he'd also not played for a little while as well, so sort of semi-retired.
And he had his moments when he
wasn't bad.
He wasn't bad. No, I think that would be awesome. And
I think the important thing for the Mariners and clubs like them is that if you're going to build a team from youth, you need to have good experience around them.
Yeah.
That's why I like the idea of Bruno going there or going to Newcastle as well. You want those kind of guys who can help show the ropes to those young players, because otherwise, things go bad in a season and those young players are sort of looking for people to lean on, and then they're not there.
And you saw that probably with the Mariners, but with a lot of teams this season. I think there was a little bit of a leadership vacuum in some of the teams, and when things didn't go well, there was nobody to kind of steady the ship, and that's exactly what these kind of players would provide.
Last one, we know that Max Burgess has left Sydney FC. Newcastle? Do you think he'd look good sliding in some through balls for Eli Adams or working on the other side of the pitch?
I think those two together, that would be a force to be reckoned with. And I think at Sydney FC, we didn't probably see the best of Max Burgess like what we saw at Western United, but he's a terrific talent, and I used to hate playing against him because he was so technical, but also kind of with his long limbs, he was just so awkward and such a hard person to get the ball off. So I'm excited to see him play more minutes than he did at Sydney FC and be back in and amongst the goals and assists.
Very good, Tommy. Speaking of your Mariners, they made more history this weekend in the A-League Ninja Grand Final. Let's hear from Amy on Dub Zone.
Well, this week on our final edition of Dub Zone, elation for the Mariners and heartache for victory after an epic Ninja A-League Grand Final. We'll be breaking down all the fallout and the storylines that followed, and we'll look back at the year that was as we wrap up season 2024-25. Teo Pellizzeri and two-time Ninja A-League champion Teresa Polias will join me again. How did you find the Grand Final, guys?
Yeah, one for the ages. It was an enthralling match, and I really can't wait to delve right into it.
It was a triumph of coaching for the Mariners, for Em Husband. We'll go into how they won and why they won. And also, we might just disagree on some of the things Victory could have done differently to try and win it themselves.
And we'll take a look at you two player of the season as well. That's all ahead on our final edition of Dub Zone on the A-League's website, app and YouTube channel, plus on 10 Play.
Excellent. Tommy, let's rip into extra time. We'll start with what the Socceroos have done around a train-on squad in Abu Dhabi for players whose seasons have finished. Tony Popovic wants to look at them and assess their fitness levels before he selects a proper squad for the upcoming qualifiers. From the A-League, he's called up Alex Gersbach, Caceres, Borello, Milanovic and Taggart.
Yep.
What do you think about those moves and any major exclusions there, do you think?
Well, I think Segacic is the one that we both spoke about off air. I'm surprised that he wasn't included in that, and it seemed like he was available for selection in that. But I think there's no other surprises in there. I think they've all had terrific end to the season. I must admit, these training camps, not many international teams, particularly in Europe, do them. So, after the end of a gruelling season, I think it's interesting to see that he's decided to do that. But ultimately, I think it'd be interesting to see how many of those players end up in the final squad.
If it gives us a 1% advantage in terms of qualifying for the World Cup, Tommy, don't care. Let's do it.
Yeah, agreed.
Ange Postecoglou has the Europa League final on Thursday morning. I know we're both personally invested in this outcome. If he wins it, will that be the greatest coaching achievement in Australian sport?
Coaching achievement? Yeah, I think it has to be up there. I mean, there's no other one that kind of comes to mind to consider how hard it is to win one of those competitions. Obviously the Champions League is the pinnacle, but the Europa League, probably the second biggest club trophy in world football. So that would be awesome, and fingers crossed he can get the job done.
Yep. It'll be a nervous wait until 5 a.m. Thursday, Tommy, believe you me. The Dolan Warren medals are going to be aired next week on Tuesday. Who's your tip to win the Johnny Warren medal?
This is really tough. We've spoken about it before. There's not really any standouts, and you'd have to look at kind of the likes of Noah Botic and Goodwin and Milanovic. These kind of players, I think, will be in the discussion, but it'll be interesting to see which way that goes. But those three names that come to mind.
I'll just throw Segacic into the mix, and just because it has been such an even season in terms of no single player has dominated it, that I think the players who got the most goals and assists will probably attract the most votes.
That's probably true.
So I think it'll be one of those four.
Yep.
It's also been confirmed that Perth Glory will face AC Milan in a July pre-season matchup in Perth. Which one-on-one matchup are you most looking forward to there?
This is interesting that you can take your pick, but I think obviously Kyle Walker went there recently, and seeing Lachie Wales come up against him. I'm sorry, Lachie, but I think that'll be a really interesting matchup.
That's brutal, man. Oh, wow. Well, on that highly hilarious note, Tommy, we'll bring the program to a close. That's it for you this season, bro?
Yeah, it is. It's been a pleasure.
What are you doing?
Off to Europe for holidays, so obviously keep a close eye on the end of the season and be watching closely, but looking forward to hopefully being back next season.
It's been great fun having you on, mate. We've got Alex Brosk on the panel next week. We'll see you then.